Good afternoon. I'm Ronald Lauder, and I'm welcoming you to ADDF's 7th Annual Fall Symposium. Earlier at the symposium, I mentioned that Leonard and I started ADDF 18 years ago because no other nonprofit was helping to develop drugs to fight dementia. Even though more and more people here in America and around the world are afflicted by these terrible diseases. I want to tell you why we became involved. Right now, while you sit here listening to me, you're surrounded by millions of memories. They are with you every minute of every day. They warn you, especially when you think of a loved one now gone. They make you laugh, they make you smile, and sometimes they make you sad. You could not do your work or even accomplish it, the simplest task, without them. We use everything we've learned all our lives to make decisions all day long. Memory is a basic part of our brain that defines who we are. And when memory is lost, we are lost, even though we may still believe and be alive. It's called Alzheimer's, the greatest equal opportunity disease. It strikes men and women, all races, all religions, rich and poor, Democrats, Republicans, and even independents. It hits all groups and all people. Right now, 5.5 million Americans have Alzheimer's, and 500,000 will die from it this year. To put that into perspective, 40,000 Americans will die from breast cancer this year, and 40,000 from prostate cancer. We spend a lot of money taking care of these people. It is estimated over $265 billion a year. Imagine how those billions of dollars could be spent on education, finding cures for other diseases, feeding the hungry, if there were a cure. Some 18 years ago, Len and I decided that we could not accept Alzheimer's as an inevitable part of life, or we could fight it. Because today, our efforts and organizations like ours are playing a very important part in developing cures for this, and that we are very excited about. And we are concentrating on 4 areas that will either lead to a cure or significantly slow the progression of the disease. Let me tell you about them briefly. The first involves neuroprotection. The leading factor in Alzheimer is aging. That's when cells break down. Neuroprotection helps preserve our cells. The most promising program is called C31, and there's a pill that they have. Time magazine called it the Alzheimer pill, a radical new drug that could change old age. We need it in a hurry. C31 is already in phase 2 human clinical trials. This amazing drug was developed by a research team headed by Dr. Frank Longo, who is now at Stanford University. We saw great possibilities in C31 16 years ago, and we became the founding investors. 5 years later, in 2005, we helped spin the project out of academia and into a biotech company called Pharmatrofix. 9 years after that, in 2014, the FDA approved the first clinical trials of C31. This is a perfect example of our venture model. It also gives you an idea how long this can take. We've invested millions of dollars, but Pharmatrofix still needs hundreds of millions of dollars more before this drug is on the market. But This is a huge leap forward, and it could change everything. Another major cause of Alzheimer's comes from toxic proteins in the brain, like amyloids. ADDF is supporting a biotech company called GliaCure with a drug developed at Tufts that will remove these proteins. Right now, it is in early stage clinical trials. On this front, there is a second company we support called AXM, which is based in Milan. AXM is developing a different approach to this problem in the brain. Both of these are very promising. A third strategy involves developing drugs related to genetics and epigenetics. 60% of all people with Alzheimer's have a parent with a genetic risk. We are supporting gene therapy programs at Harvard and Cornell to study this problem. And we're working on epigenetics drug at a biotech company in Barcelona that focuses on this. Finally, we are taking a very different practical approach by testing FDA-approved drugs for other diseases and testing them for Alzheimer's. Howard Phillip calls this repurposing. We have supported 21 clinical trials of these pre-existing drugs. I believe all four of these areas are very, very exciting. Because of the efforts of the ADDF under the brilliant leadership of Dr. Howard Phillip, we have funded over 500 drug discovery research projects with nearly $100 million spent. And that's a large part thanks to you. And thanks to you all in this room. Today we are here to take stock, to learn where we are in this fight and how far we still have to go. And as you heard from Howard and the panel this morning, there is a good news on this front. For many of you, this fight is personal. I want to thank each of you for being here, for getting involved, and for your contributions to this effort. I want to remind you that every dollar you donate goes directly to research because Leonard and I are underwriting all of the overhead. I also want to remind you that we still need your donations. We need to hear your advice. We need you because this is a big fight for not just for Leonard and myself, but for all of us. I said this before, but trust me on this. You will never feel better about supporting an organization, and you will never do more to help the entire world than helping us. Before I introduce our MC, I want to thank the sponsors of today's lunch, the Estee Lauder Companies, Eli Lilly, and Staples. I also want to thank my co-chairs, my wife Jo Carroll, my brother Leonard, and his wife Judy, Liz and Randall Sandler, Renee and Robert Belfer, Nancy and Mel Godis, and the Samuel I. Newhouse Foundation for helping to make this possible. It is now my great pleasure to turn this event over to our very able host, the nationally known journalist and trustee of ADDF, the wonderful Paul Zahn. Thank you all. Thank you. It's all yours.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ronald. We owe you and your family such a debt of gratitude for all that your vision has done for this organization and your many other forms of support. It is my absolute pleasure to be back here to host the 7th annual Hope on the Horizon Luncheon, and I think it's fitting that this luncheon is being held during National Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month. And like many of you in this room, my life has been deeply impacted by Alzheimer's. My mother is 92 years old, and as Ronald mentioned, there's probably nothing more painful than seeing someone you know and someone you love be robbed of their memory. And my mother was a very much respected college professor who once spoke 6 languages fluently. And to watch this disease slowly take grip of her essence, her soul has just been so horrifically painful for all of us. So for those of you that picked up a purple ribbon, we are all in solidarity here today. hoping that someday families won't have to suffer the way all of ours have, and to applaud all the brave people out there, the caregivers, the family members, who are helping these patients. We salute the brave souls who have shared their personal stories with us as they put faces on the nearly 5.5 million Americans that Ron mentioned who are now living with this disease. We are all trying to reduce the stigma and the fear surrounding it, but as you all know already, awareness is only half of the battle. We also need a cure, as Ronald said, and the ADDF is the only charity dedicated to funding drugs to prevent and treat Alzheimer's and other dementias. I'm always amazed every year I come back how much more progress has been made. I saw many of you in the Symposium today, and tremendous progress is being made. And we thank you for helping us move this along. When you donate to the ADDF, every single dollar goes to drug discovery. And today you can help out this life-saving work and have some fun too by participating in our door prize drawing. You might have noticed on the table out there are lots of wonderful things to bid on, donated by our magnificent supporters. Prizes include a getaway to the Yamagani Resort in Jackson Hole. Have any of you been there? I hear it's absolutely, Connie has. It's great, right? Now you're going to have someone bidding against you. Also, a round of golf for 4 on Hamilton Farms Hickory Course, and a beautiful basket featuring creme de la mer and Joe Malone products. So all you have to do is fill out the little envelope that is placed before you at your table today. And our goal this year is $100,000, and I have faith we can get there with all of you friends out there. So staff will come by the tables a little bit later on in lunch to pick up your envelopes, and then at the end of lunch you'll see on a board the winners posted. So I wish you all luck, and in the meantime I hope you enjoy your lunch, and we'll be back with the rest of the program after that. Enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now resume. Please welcome to the stage Howard Fillett.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor and a privilege and a pleasure for me to be able to stand before you and thank all of you for your support in our endeavors together, working together to accelerate the discovery of new drugs for Alzheimer's disease. I know all of us in the room, including myself, my father died about 3 years ago from Alzheimer's. But my personal journey with Alzheimer's really started about 35 years ago, actually a little bit more than that, when I walked into a nursing home. I had done my training in the early 70s and never heard of Alzheimer's disease in medical school or in my internship or residency. Took care of hundreds and hundreds of older people, and never heard the word Alzheimer's. And in 1980, I had the opportunity to walk into a nursing home, which I had never been in before. And I saw this building that was populated by 300 people who had this horrible illness where they couldn't speak or care for themselves or walk or go to the bathroom, and it was an illness I had never heard of. And that day completely changed my life. At that time, there was nothing known about Alzheimer's disease. I mean, literally, there was no research. Although Alzheimer's had discovered the illness in 1906, nothing was done because it was thought to be a disease of younger people. It was called pre-senile dementia. And senility was thought to be a normal part of aging. And it wasn't until 1970 that some doctors working in London did an experiment, and they showed that older people who died who were senile had the plaques and tangles. They had Alzheimer's disease. So it was on that day in history in 1970 that Alzheimer's disease, senility, went from being thought of as a normal part of aging to a disease of old age. And that was the reason why when I went to med school I never heard of the illness, because it wasn't in the textbooks yet and there was no research on it. And so even though we've been doing research on diabetes and had drugs for diabetes since the 1920s and drugs for hypertension since the 1930s, and we've been doing research on cancers for over a century, we started really late. And I know many of you are wondering why we're not there yet. But I want to give you a perspective from my personal, professional life's journey to say that when I started, we knew nothing. We knew nothing about the science of Alzheimer's disease, and we knew nothing clinically about it. Most doctors never heard of it. They didn't know how to take care of people, and there were no drugs. There were no drugs. The amyloid protein, which we're so excited about today, which has made great advances for us, was discovered in 1984, which in the lifetime of science is just about yesterday, but not time in memoriam. It takes about 20, 30 years from the time of a discovery to the development of a new drug. And if you consider that Alzheimer's, the amyloid protein, which was the main clue that we picked up on because that's what we saw in the brain, was discovered in 1984, and the genetics of it discovered around 1986. It's 30 years later, and in the first week of December, we're going to an international meeting on clinical trials in San Diego, and we're going to hear about a Lilly trial that we're really excited about, which may take this vaccine, this amyloid, anti-amyloid strategy, and hopefully they're going to tell us that it works. And it'll be the first time that we'll have a drug that really might make a difference. It not only will probably be able to show using this amyloid scan that we helped to develop as a foundation and is now owned by Eli Lilly and has revolutionized the way we do clinical trials. And these vaccines that Biogen has and Lilly and some other companies, these antibodies, can remove the amyloid. It's been shown that we can remove the amyloid from the brain with these drugs, these biologicals. But the question, of course, is, does that help patients improve? And we don't know that yet. It might turn out that by removing the amyloid, these are just scars in the brain or deposits, but they don't really affect the disease itself, and it may not help people get better. And we won't know that, but we're going to know that in December from the Lilly work, and we'll know by the end of next year in 2017 probably from the Biogen work. These companies are risking billions of dollars on this. But the thing is, we still need innovation. When somebody gets cancer, they go on these regimens of 4 or 5 drugs at a time. People on hypertension in this country today are on usually 2 or 3 drugs at a time. Diabetics are on 2 or 3 or 4 drugs. We need cocktails of agents, and the reason we need cocktails is because all of these diseases of old age, and they are diseases of old age, hypertension, cancer, diabetes, they're all diseases of old age, have multiple mechanisms, multiple ways that these cells get injured, and especially in the brain, multiple ways. So if you just hit one way, you're not going to hit the other way. So you need sort of what I call a funnel, where you have all these different ways that the brain gets injured. It comes down, and you want to have one drug, or 1 or 2 drugs that just help the cells survive, regardless of the kind of injury. And so that's what we're doing. We're in the job. We're not spending billions of dollars on these phase 3 trials because that's what it costs, but we're passing the baton of innovation on to the pharmaceutical industry. We're feeding the pipeline in industry and in academia. We funded 85 biotech companies. These are small, often virtual companies with small amounts of money, relatively small sort of angel or early venture capital type investments. And many of these have gone on from preclinical into clinical trials. These are all innovative types of approaches. We're funding right now, there's over 100 clinical trials going on around the world for Alzheimer's disease, which is incredible. When 35 years ago, there were none. And about 55% of those clinical trials that are going on right now are directed towards this amyloid protein. But 45% are innovative. And out of those 100 clinical trials, as a measure of what I would call success, the ADDF has contributed in one way or another to over 20% of those clinical trials. And for a modest organization like ours, I think that's really, without being self-promoting, if you'll forgive me, I think it's really, to my knowledge, having started this thing at the request of Ronald and Leonard with a desk and a chair in 1998, 17, 18 years later, that's an incredible achievement that we're all very proud of at the foundation. Thank you. So this is the shots on goal approach. We have to be humble in our knowledge of science and what we think we know. And most drugs fail. 90% of people who work in the pharmaceutical industry will spend their entire lives, their entire careers, never working on a drug that comes to market. The nature of science is failure and learning and failure and learning and failure and learning. And somewhere in that process, serendipity plays a role. And you come up with the drug. And many drugs have come from serendipity, penicillin being one of them. Somebody noticed a fungus on some bread, and that's how we got penicillin. So that's why our strategy is very much directed towards these 4 main areas that Ronald talked about. And this morning you heard 4 companies and programs that we're funding as case studies where you could learn in depth more about some of the projects that we're funding. Dr. Sandra Black, a professor at the University of Toronto, told us about how hypertension, 65% of people at age 75 have hypertension, and hypertension is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And there are antihypertensives that are neuroprotective, and there are antihypertensives that are not. And so wouldn't it be great if hypertension is clearly a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, if one day I, as a practicing physician, could prescribe an antihypertensive to someone that I also knew was going to prevent them from getting Alzheimer's disease by mitigating the risk of hypertension. And so she's doing a study where she's looking at 2 hypertension drugs that are on the market today and comparing them for their ability to slow the decline of dementia in people with Alzheimer's disease. And that's called comparative effectiveness and repurposing. We heard from Carlos Buesa, who's the CEO of a company we're supporting in Barcelona. This company is an epigenetics company. Epigenetics, we think usually of mutations as being the main form of the way that genetics affects disease, but in fact it's turning out that mutations are important in children and in childhood diseases, but in old age, the real genetic factor of disease is called epigenetics because there's so much regulation around the DNA about what genes are expressed. And it's that regulation that makes us human. All our cells have all the DNA. Kidney cells have brain cell DNA. Brain cells have kidney DNA. So epigenetics suppresses the kidney genes in the brain cells so that they can become brain cells. But what happens with aging is this epigenetic machinery that it would, for example, turn on programs to make new synapses so we can make new thoughts. That epigenetic machinery is also damaged by aging, oxidation, and so on. And what Horizon is doing is creating a completely novel set of drugs that are going to reverse these deficits in the epigenetic machinery of how new synapses are made. And we've been supporting the company from preclinical research. We're now in the clinic in Spain, and we're looking forward to more results from that company. We also heard from Michaela Gallagher, who's a professor of neuroscience and one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, who's developing a repurposed drug from seizure that's been used for seizures in people with epilepsy. And she's taking that drug and using 1/10 of the normal dose to reduce the hyperactivity that occurs in the hippocampus of the brain where memories are made and where Alzheimer's disease starts. And to reduce that hyperactivity to protect the neurons, because when you have hyperactivity of these neurons, they're undergoing stress because there's so much going on in the cell. They need so much glucose, and they're at risk for dying, basically. And so by suppressing this hyperactivity that seems to occur with aging and as it moves towards Alzheimer's, Michaela thinks that she can not only have a symptomatic effect in people who are losing their memory, but also having a disease-modifying effect on these cells to slow the rate of progression of disease. Michaela is also one of our icons because in our venture philanthropy model, we truly believe that by funding biotechnology companies, we can more rapidly accelerate the development of drugs. We get the spirit of entrepreneurism, we get capitalism in there, we get investors, and it's the kind of thing that we need to do to bring these ideas out of academia and into companies to accelerate their development. And Michaela is an icon because as an academic professor her whole life. She then decided to become a CEO, and it's been wonderful to watch how she's transitioned to becoming a person who's actually developing drugs and raising money for the company and working with investors and going through all that. We know that Michaela will never leave the lab, but she'll always have this biotech experience that will help her to develop drugs going forward. And the last one is really representative of what we're honoring today, Donald Newhouse, and we're honoring our over 10-year partnership with the Association for Frontotemporal Dementia Degeneration. And I want to thank Susan Dickinson, who's the CEO of that organization, for her partnership as well. Frontotemporal dementia is a rather uncommon form of dementia. There are many forms of dementia, but it's different because rather than affecting the temporal lobes where memory is, the hippocampus, so that 90% of the people that present with dementia to the practice will have memory problems as the first symptom. In frontotemporal dementia, the frontal lobes are affected, and the frontal lobes are important for abstract reasoning, planning, judgment, orientation, and emotional control. And so people who develop frontotemporal dementia, their disease is mostly in the frontal lobes at the start instead of in the temporal lobes. And their initial symptoms are those of change in personality, loss of emotional control, and it's really underdiagnosed because patients don't think, spouses, for example, don't really understand what's going on, and neither do doctors. We don't have good tests clinically to detect people with FTD. But the thing for us, from the point of view of drug discovery about FTD, which is really interesting, is that there are forms of FTD that only get the tangles. And as you know, when Alzheimer discovered Alzheimer's disease, it was plaques and tangles, and the tangles of the dying neurons. And we can detect these now with a new PET imaging test that goes beyond the amyloid, and we'll be able to see these tangles because it's really important that we see the tangles in life because they really correlate with the loss of cognitive function. They're the loss of brain cells that correlates with the loss of cognitive function. But what we want to understand is why patients develop the tangles, why are the neurons dying? And in FTD, there are forms of FTD where they don't get amyloid. It's a much simpler model for us to develop drugs, and we can target drugs to just get rid of the tangles, to just protect the neurons. So we want to develop, our mission is develop drugs to accelerate the development of drugs for Alzheimer's and related dementias. FTD is a related dementia, and we think that by funding and working with the FTD people that will learn something about FTD that can then be translated back for people with Alzheimer's disease. So this partnership is very important scientifically, and we're very grateful to Don Newhouse and to Susan Dickinson for their partnership in developing new drugs clinically for FTD. So we've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but from a time when the disease in my lifetime, in our lifetimes, was unheard of. When I used to say, people would say in the 80s, what do you do? And I'd say, I'm an Alzheimer's doctor, and I'm doing research on Alzheimer's disease. And they'd look at me, and they'd say, old-timers disease? I never heard of that. So going from me, from a time in my professional life when this was an unheard of disease, even though we knew it was going to devastate economies around the world, to a time where in December we're going to hear from a major pharmaceutical company about a really exciting result, and there's over 100 clinical trials going on. This is a huge difference. We can make a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease now in life, in patients, without an autopsy, without a brain biopsy. I just send them to the radiology office for a scan that ADDF developed. And the last thing I want to say is that that scan has enabled prevention. And we all want prevention because more than any other disease, once you start losing your mind, the game is pretty much over. You can have hypertension and try to prevent that first heart attack. That's great. But if we don't prevent dementia, then quality of life is destroyed. How do we do prevention studies? How do we find normal people and try to prevent them from losing their mind? We can do that now because of that scan. And that's going on now. that's going on. There are people being tested in the community with the scan who are normal. If they have a positive scan, we know they have early Alzheimer's disease, but there's no clinical symptoms, and now they're being put on anti-amyloid drugs to prevent them from getting any kind of cognitive impairment. So that's really exciting. We're doing prevention, and then we have a whole lot of knowledge about lifestyle and comorbidity management, hypertension, exercise, and all these other things. And I could go on for probably an hour or so, but I know you guys all want to get out of here. So let me just thank you all for listening, and thank you for your commitment. And I especially want to thank Ronald and Leonard for their tremendous, amazing support over the years. We wouldn't be here today in any way, shape, or form if it wasn't for them, and we're so grateful for them to pay our overhead. So every dollar, every single dollar that you donate here and give to us and work with us, we want to work together with you. Every single penny of that dollar goes not just to research, but it goes to developing drugs, and that's what we're all about. So your support is crucial. We wouldn't be here today without you as well, supporting that research. And so I want to thank all of you, and closing by saying it's a really great privilege for me to introduce Leonard Lauder to our stage here and thank him for everything he's done.
Thank you, Howard, and good afternoon to all of you. And the best thing about what we've just heard is, yes, there is hope. There's hope for prevention and early discovery, and if early discovery, there's hope for a cure. Now, if we had been in this room 18 years ago when the ADDF was first founded, we would say to you, we hope there will be hope. We now know there is hope. And when Howard developed the wonderful PET scan, which could tell you 5 or 10 and 20 years in advance if you had something that was going to develop into Alzheimer's, people would say, why bother? Okay, now we can bother because we will know. And so this has been Ronald's and my life work. We've been passionate about it, and I apologize to those of you who I put my arm around your neck. They say, just beware of Leonard Lauder when he comes and puts his arm around your shoulder because it's aiming for your neck. But we are a pure play. We do drug discovery. That's what we do, and that's what will make us win, and that's why everyone here has hope today because of what you've done for us, and it's going to be great. Now, I want to invite you to meet my dear friends, Alice Shore and Bonnie Pfeiffer Evans, who are coming here. They're both on the board of Alzheimer's, ADDF. No, I want you on either side of me.
Okay.
So
oh, yeah.
this,
sandwich. I get a lot.
Judy, it's okay.
Sorry, Judy. No, it's not.
No. Okay. I tried to get away with it. I'm sorry. Look, I love these two because they were with us from the very start. And Bonnie's husband, Charles Evans, is the one who started the work originally, and the Charles Evans Award. And so we're going to present that award today to my dear friend, Donald Newhouse. And I want to tell you a little bit about Donald. Now, we have these long introductions. I got to tell you something. I was in love with Donald's wife, Susie. Now, they're love with a small L because by the time I met them, I was married. So relax. But Susie Newhouse was the light of everyone's life. I'm looking around the room. I know a lot of you here were people I had met earlier on when we were having dinner with the Newhouses. We did it at their home, etc. And the New Year's Eve party, this delightful gay woman, her light was snuffed out by frontal temporal lobe dementia, and which is a first cousin to Alzheimer's. So my brother Ronald and I formed an alliance with Donald a 50-50 alliance to put money in. It's up to $10 million to be able to get at this key disease, frontal temporal lobe of dementia. And I would like to invite Donald to come up at the stage here if he can. Please. I'm not going to go into his whole biography other than to say he's from Syracuse, New York. No, he's from New York. His wife came from Syracuse. He was a graduate of Syracuse. His parents were good friends of my parents. We are related, more or less, right? Right. And his kids are related to mine, more or less. And we are all today, everyone in this room is a member of our extended family, the people who have joined together to fight this dreadful disease. And so I'm proud to have you all present the award to Donald Newhouse, the Charles Evans Award, which is incredible. May I ask you to... That is a pure diamond. It comes to De Beers.
Congratulations. Thank you. Two things before I start my speech. First of all, I'm glad I got there first. Secondly, that is not the president-elect. Many of us have stories of pain and love that bring us together today. Here is mine. In the beginning, I was apprenticing in the newspaper business under the fierce and demanding tutelage of my Uncle Ted. I early on learned that the only acceptable answer to a request he made was, "Yes, Ted." One day, while driving to a meeting, Ted said to me, "Donald, I have met this girl and you are going to marry her." Susie was her name. So on a beautiful starlit night on the Staten Island ferry, the night after our first date, I proposed to my Susie. Her romantic answer was, "You must be crazy." A year and a half after, we were married. We had a beautiful marriage for 48 years. When in 2003, at 68, my Sue was diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia, one of the dementias caused by frontotemporal degeneration. And thus began my odyssey into the world of dementia. The symptoms of frontotemporal dementia degeneration are unlike symptoms of Alzheimer's. Sufferers of FTD do not have memory loss. They suffer from an inability to speak intelligibly and understand speech, or they have behavioral problems and sometimes motor problems. For the next 7 years, my Sue spiraled down and plateaued, until on a day in November 2010, she crashed. Shortly thereafter, she lost the ability to speak and to understand speech. She became aggressive. She could not care for herself, and she had various motor problems and was eventually wheelchair bound. Susie died in 2015, 1 month after our 60th anniversary. But fate had another cruel trick in store for us. In 2014, we were doubly devastated when my brother, Cy, my lifelong partner and closest friend, was diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia. His downward spiral was swift. Today, he has few words left, he has marginal comprehension, and he has motor problems, including difficulty in swallowing. During Sue's traumatic years, reinforced by Cy's having PPA, I realized that the only way we could make sense of this twin tragedy, the way Sue and Cy would want, was to commit ourselves to find a cure, treatment, and prevention for this horrendous dementia. Cy's wife Victoria and his and my children support this commitment. In exploring ways to carry out this commitment, I was drawn to the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration. With the guidance of the executive director, Susan Dickinson, and informed by its Medical Advisory Council, I came to understand that the starting point on a road to a cure, treatment, and prevention for FTD was to find biomarkers for the dementia. Susan Dickinson, during the course of our many conversations, made me aware of the close relationship between the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration and the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. And now, a little bit of history. My parents were friends with the great Esty and her family. My brother was close to Leonard in business and to Leonard and Ronald as friends with a common interest in the art world. Leonard's son William had an apartment in my building. Occasionally during Susie's time of trouble, I would run into Leonard in our lobby and we would talk about FTD and Alzheimer's. I had immersed myself trying to gain a layman's understanding of the science of dementia, so when I received an invitation to attend an ADDF board dinner, I jumped at the opportunity. I was greatly impressed, as well I should have been, by the breadth of research being funded by ADDF, by its achievements, by its energy and focus, and by its great leader, Howard Phillip. Subsequently, word came to me that Leonard and Ronald were interested in a partnership with matching grants, the money to be used to fund research to find repurposed drugs or novel drugs that would be effective in treating, curing, and preventing frontotemporal degeneration. And thus, the Treat FTD partnership was born. So I greatly appreciate your honoring me today, but in all candor, my greatest accomplishment was saying yes to Susan, Howard, Leonard, and Ronald, and of course my Uncle Ted. And I do accept this honor in memory of all those whose suffering brought us here today. Thank you.
Just one word. Donald, thank you, thank you, thank you. As you were talking, I remember Mitzi, I remember Sam, I remember Ted, I remember all of the members of your family, I remember my dear Susie, and let's say this, we are all one family here, joined together to cure and fight this dreadful disease. And thank you all.
Thank you. You could stay right here.
No.
We're so all deeply appreciative of Donald Newhouse joining us today. We greatly admire your personal courage and your family's dedication to trying to find a cure for FTD. And on behalf of the entire board, ADDF, thank you very, very much for coming today, allowing us to raise our voices about the need for even more funding to find a cure. And I wanted to take the opportunity one more time to thank some of our key sponsors, Estee Lauder, you've heard of them before, Staples and Eli Lilly, Dr. Phillip, and our panelists today. I'm sure Many of you would agree. We learned a lot today, and there's a lot to ponder when we go home today and think about the challenges that lie ahead. And again, thank you for supporting the critical work of the foundation. As you wind your way out of the ballroom, you can look up on the board to see if you were lucky enough to get one of our door prizes today. But as you leave here today, I hope you do feel the sense of hope that Dr. Phillett and his team have greatly inspired, along with the Lauders and our other sponsors. So have a good rest of the day, and we hope to see you back at one of our events next year. Thanks for coming.
Whenever the